Ooh, the light from my laptop is making everything look spooky. Hi friends and neighbours, my name is Strange Fish and welcome to my channel, Strange Opinions, where I'm going to talk about things that interest me. Today, that's going to be all about scary movies in a segment that I'm going to call Fishy Films. Fishy Films, Fishy Films, get your fishy, fishy films. Can you come up with a better theme song? La 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 la. La 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 la. Oh, but before I get started, let me draw your attention to my little rocking horse boy here. Oh, he's a little cutie. But he doesn't have a name yet, which is very sad. And yes, I know he could be called Damien. But Damien's a little bit too obvious. So if you have any better suggestions, why not leave it down in the comments for me? Otherwise, this poor little thing's going to end up being called Matt Demon. Purely because I enjoy saying Matt Damon. Because Megan is out in the cinema, or probably on streaming by the time I get this up and running, I'm going to talk about scary dolls in films. I'm so unnatural, so unnatural. Hi, Megan is out. And I went to see it in the cinema. I went out in the big bad world and saw a big good film. That was good. I liked it. End of review. But no, I enjoyed it and I thought I would talk about it. One thing I want to make clear before I start is that I don't really know stuff. I just like stuff. So I suppose it's silly to make a review about any sort of thing. But I do like finding out about stuff. How many times have I said stuff? Can I say stuff more times? So I went and did a little research on scary dolls in movies. There are way more of them out there than I care to count. And though I haven't seen all of them, I didn't watch a fair few of them for this video. I didn't watch The Boy again. I refused. Why are there so many scary doll movies? Why are we all scared of them? Why do I even care? Well, there's a theory on that. On the first two at least. Or more accurately, a hypothesis. And that is the uncanny valley. Now, if you're like me, you've probably only heard that in relation to usually low budget animations. Human faces that are just not quite right. You only really have to look at Pixar's Tin Toy to know what I'm talking about. That baby scared the crap out of me. And I was well past nappy wearing days, so that's a bad. And apparently I'm not alone. Most people, it seems, were severely creeped out by that baby. And not just because he was being all mean to the toys. It was his real, but not real, appearance that did it. But the Uncanny Valley doesn't have its roots in animation. It comes from robotics. Masahiro Mori. I'm probably saying that wrong. Masahiro Mori, a Japanese roboticist, came up with the idea in 1970. Roboticist is a hard word to say, did you know that? Have you tried saying roboticist? And I'm going to have to try and say ventriloquist several times. Ventriloquist. Roboticist. A Japanese roboticist, Masahiro Mori, came up with the term in 1970. He always said he had an uneasy feeling around waxwork figures, and the new prosthetic hands that were coming out gave him the same sort of icky feel. So when he was asked to contribute an article to the magazine Energy entitled Robotics and Thought, he delivered a piece titled Bukimi no Tani, roughly translated as The Valley of Eeriness. Spooky. I'm going to pop a little graph up here. Masahiro Mori's hypothesis and this graph suggest that the closer robots come to looking realistic, the more we can relate to them and respond positively, but only up to a certain degree. There comes a point when the robots are both too real and not real enough, and leave us with a little eerie feeling. Whether it's the dead eyes, or the lack of real expression, or the jerky movements, or the robotic voice, they just can't accurately mimic life to the degree that we need to feel comfortable. And this is fine in a robot that looks like a robot, but when you try to make them look human, that's when the problems come in. This is what Masahiro Mori called the uncanny valley, the point where faces become almost too real to be comfortable with. But now that we've got that bit of braining out of the way, let's talk about scary movies. I've just realised everything's going to be backwards and my t-shirt's going to say Kajam, unless I flip my camera. Should I flip my camera? I don't know.
I'd rather sock and a lemon drop than to try my luck with lollipop, because I always drop my lollipop and it gets all over icky.
The earliest creepy doll to appear on screen was Otto, a tiny ventriloquist dummy, in the 1929 film The Great Gabbo. But contrary to what you might expect, Otto wasn't the evil part of this duo, nor was this technically a horror movie. It seems to have been retrospectively placed in horror, rather uncomfortably really, as it's more of a melodramatic musical. I couldn't find out much about Otto himself, except that he was hand-carved by Frank Marshall, who was such a prolific and popular puppet maker in the vaudeville era that he was known as America's Geppetto. And these days his puppets are collector's items and can sell for tens of thousands of dollars. I'm gonna sneeze. Bless me, for I have sneezed. Preemptive bless. No sneezy. Okay. Achoo! Throughout the film, Otto appears to be operated by a hand pump attached to a long tube which allows Gabbo to operate him from a distance. The biggest selling point of their act is that Gabbo can make Otto talk and sing all while eating, drinking and smoking. A fact that makes him all the more applauded in the film and makes it all the more creepier for us. Obviously this adds to the eeriness factor as we're left wondering whether Otto is really alive or not. While that isn't what the movie makers were actually going for, the ambiguity makes it scary even for modern audiences. Add to that Otto's high, fluty, childlike voice and it only makes everything all the more unsettling. Now, you can call me a weirdo if you like, but I actually thought Otto was kinda sweet. I think he looks almost cherubic. If the cherub had fallen on his face a couple of times. Otto acts not as the possessed sentient vessel of Satan, but as Gabbo's conscience, his softer side. Gabbo himself is a brutish man, driven by ego, superstition and perfectionism. He hasn't a kind word to say to anyone, least of all his doting assistant and girlfriend Mary, who he constantly berates and blames for everything. Mary does everything for Gabbo and takes his verbal abuse in her stride with such a spring in her step that it's both heartbreaking and terrifying. She seems to see, or think she sees, something in this crass man that no one else can. And she lives by the understanding that when little Otto says something nice or compliments her or gives her words of affection, it is really Gabbo, who can't seem to express himself in any other way. But eventually even Mary has enough and leaves. This was probably the tensest scene for me, as I was left willing Mary to walk out the door and not change her mind at the last minute, and it was only the third scene in. But go she does, leaving little Otto to rebuke Gabbo for letting her leave, instead of telling her how much she meant to them. The rest of the film is oddly paced, to say the least, with Mary and Gabbo running into each other again at a Broadway show where Mary is a successful lead dancer and Gabbo is the headliner. Gabbo, believing he may have a second chance at love, becomes giddy as a schoolboy, and for once we see his gentler side emerge in his own voice. But it seems the years alone with only Otto for company has not done Gabbo any favours. Prior to meeting Mary again, it appears that Gabbo only speaks to other people now, through Otto the dummy.
Never mind. My men will attend to everything.
After this meeting, a brief hope is ignited in Gabbo, but it's quickly snuffed out when he learns that Mary is already married. This is the last straw for Gabbo's already fragile mind, who ends up having a complete and public breakdown, storming the stage during the final number and screaming at the audience, forcing the security to come and drag him off stage and management to fire him. It's perhaps not the explosive climax we might have been expecting, maybe feels a little lackluster, but looking at it not as a horror movie but more as a story of one man losing his mind, it becomes a truly heartbreaking tale. Despite his aggressive nature, I really felt sorry for Gabbo towards the end as he walks away a broken man, trailing a broken dummy behind him, his love lost, and the last thing he sees is them removing his name from the front of the theatre. His chance for success gone also. Redemption was almost in sight for him, but it was just too little, too late. The Great Gabbo is an interesting story, though not a great film. The pacing is rather slow, with very long, talky scenes, and it gets interrupted by what I would call subpar dance routines. Now, I'm not an expert in dance or in movies from the 1920s or early talkies at all, but even I could see that they were a little out of sync with each other. It was less dancing and more glorified shuffling across the stage. And even in its heyday, The Great Gabbo was not considered a great film and didn't do very well in the reviews. It does, however, boast some great performances from Eric von Stroheim, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, as Gabbo, and Betty Compson as Mary. And I have to give a little extra credit to Mary Compson for her part in the dance routine, the Spider Web of Love, or the Web of Love I think it was called, where she demonstrates incredible agility and core strength, as well as an absolute trust in her dance partner, or a complete lack of any kind of fear for her own well-being. as she leaps from the middle of the web into the waiting arms of her partner Don Douglas without even so much as a hesitation. Now that bit was scary. Though it's not the horror movie you might expect from a list like this, Otto and Gabbo have a place in cinematic history as the first on-screen depiction of the uneasy relationship between ventriloquist and dummy. It's clear from the rest of the list that it went on to inspire lots of other movies and shows, including an episode of The Simpsons, Krusty Gets Cancelled, where Krusty is outdone in the ratings war by a dummy named Gabbo.
All the kids in Springfield are SOBs.
You're going to stop in jail for years and years and years and years.
While The Great Gabbo wasn't very well received even in its day, 1945 brought us Dead of Night, an anthology of spooky stories. The most popular story, and the one that lingers with you long after the film is finished, is that of Maxwell Frere and Hugo Fitch.
I knew you wouldn't leave me, Hugo. I knew you'd come back.
Not for long, my boy.
And this time, the doll really is the bad one. Or so it seems. Like The Great Gabbo, this film could be seen as a man going mad and nothing more, but it's left a little bit more ambiguous than its predecessor. At no point was it ever suggested that Otto was alive, merely a projection of his master's already fractured ego. But Hugo is a different matter altogether. Though we never see him move by himself or commit any heinous acts, Hugo is an imposing figure despite his diminutive size, and Maxwell's unease and apparent fear of him makes us wonder who really is in control. Don't let the age of this film put you off, it's very much worth the watch. It's charming in its very 40s, very British, stiff upper lip demeanour, where everybody talks like this, and nobody seems the least bit put out by a stranger who tells them that they're all part of his recurring dream. In fact, I dare say they all think it's a jolly good wheeze.
Everybody in this room is part of my dream.
Gosh.
Good Lord, really?
Each character takes a turn at telling their own spooky story of ghosts, premonitions or cursed objects, with a brief interlude for some comic relief, while a pair of rival golfers find themselves distracted from their game by a potential love interest, and one golfer remarks to the other,
Every time I take a stroke, I see her wretched face.
The cynic of the group, the psychiatrist, tells the story of Hugo Fitch. And if you thought I was weird earlier for saying that Otto was rather sweet, it's only in comparison to other dummies on this list, like Hugo. Personally, I think all these wooden human-shaped dummies are creepy, and Hugo epitomises everything about them that I find unlikable. The big dead eyes, the fixed smile, the high creepy voice, and that little flappy lower lip. I hate that lower lip. Michael Redgrave plays the doomed Maxwell and gives a great performance of a man on the edge. He's clearly terrified of Hugo and gets very distressed when the dummy seems to go off script in the middle of a show, striking up a conversation with a fellow ventriloquist in the audience and seeming to make plans to move on from the unfortunate Maxwell. Like Gabbo, Maxwell eventually loses his mind completely, ending up catatonic in a hospital bed. Question is, was he always mad? Or was Hugo really controlling him? A question made all the more complicated when Maxwell opens his mouth in the same flapping motion as a dummy, and only Hugo's voice emerges.
Hello, Sylvester. I've been waiting for you.
For Hugo's part, I'll give this a creep factor of, but the overall film gets a popcorn rating of 1 munch. I liked it and I would recommend you have a watch of it, but I probably won't watch it again. There were some real belly laughs in here as well, hard to know if they were intentional, but when you get lines like little Sally gleefully telling her mother,
Father, you must listen. You see, Mr. Craig is going to hit me savagely.
Oh, well, I'm sure he can hit somebody else instead.
then surely that had to have been played for laughs.
My name is Talky Tina, and I love you very much. She's alive, Daddy.
If you're familiar at all with the Twilight Zone, you might also be familiar with Talky Tina. She is the first child's doll on the list, an innocent-looking doll who belongs to a little girl called Tina and says sweet little things like,
My name is Talky Tina, and you'll be sorry.
Christy's stepfather is a bit of a bully of a man who takes an instant disliking to the doll. Wonder why. Talky Tina kinda reminds me of the first time I saw a Build-A-Bear factory toy. One of the kids brought it in at work, and when you squeezed it, its little heart beat. Boom, 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 boom. No, thank you. Well, it turns out that Tina isn't very fond of the dad either and starts saying things like,
My name is Talky Tina, and I think I could even hate you.
Naturally, the dad, Eric, tries to dispose of or destroy Tina in any way he can, and naturally he fails. Tina never moves on her own and no one ever believes Eric about the things she says, so this quickly becomes another case of is this madness or is this magic? Magic! In the end, spoilers, Eric hears a noise in the middle of the night and goes downstairs to investigate, tripping over the doll on the way and falling to his death. When the wife comes through to find his lifeless body at the foot of the stairs and Talky Tina by his side, she picks the doll up, only for it to say,
My name is Talky Tina. And you'd better be nice to me.
I couldn't find a full version of this episode, but the little clips I did see made her the creepiest doll so far on the list, so I give her a creep factor of I'm Talky Tina and I don't like you.
So deep and rich and red and warm.
Hugo the Second. His name's not actually Hugo the Second, but as he's the second one on the list, I thought I would call him that. And I swear they are getting creepier the further we go along. Hugo 2 is a carved caricature, and I've never liked caricatures. Don't know what it is about them, but something about them makes me feel a little queasy. With this Hugo, we have our first instance of something genuinely supernatural and unambiguously evil. Hugo is able to astound the audience by talking and walking by himself. I'm pretty sure even a 1960s audience wouldn't have been so naive and would assume it's a person in a suit, but movie audience is a bunch of buffoons and they lap it up. It's made out to be this great mystery that newspaperman Mark has to get to the bottom of. In my mind, the only mystery would be why anyone would go to this show at all. Hugo's master, the Great Varelli, lacks any kind of stage presence and puts his volunteers through the most horrible and humiliating of ordeals. Now, I know he's meant to be mean and make us feel icky, but you know what feels even more icky? Someone who's charismatic and charming in one setting then turns into a total bastard when nobody else is looking. But I guess we're not going for subtlety for this one. Once again, it is the master and not the puppet who is evil. But this time, he's really evil, with one of the worst things he does being hypnotising a young lady to be his bride slave, and eventually replacing Hugo, who, spoilers again, turns out to have been a former assistant whose soul was trapped in the body of the dummy by Varelli. He's a charmer, that one. I will give this one a creep factor of
Help me.
because trapped in the body of a dummy for decades? Ugh. But the dummy is less creepy than Varelli, and I think we need to add bonus points for his perverted ways. A popcorn rating of what flavour is this? Because it didn't really hold my attention. Maybe I just don't have the higher brain power required for the slower paced movies of the past, but honestly most of the time I was just checking the little red line to see how long the movie had left. Were we done yet?
Here he is, boys! Here he is, world! Here he is, Fitch!
Magic enraged parents in 1978. Hundreds of letters were written by angry parents who said their children had been frightened and traumatised by the trailer. I have a solution for that. Don't let your kid watch the trailer for a scary movie. Now, I like puppets. Early ventriloquist dolls being the exception. I'm going back to that one flappy lip again. But Fats has the much more favoured by me, lower jaw hinge, which is a lot more palatable for some reason. I'm also a bit of a sucker for the more complicated dummy heads with all the little mechanisms that make the eyebrows move and the cheeks move and the top lips, and gives him a much wider range of expression, so that probably makes him my favourite dummy on the list. But all those extra features and that more humanish face does mean that we're heading more towards the uncanny valley with this one. While the exaggerated features of some dummies leaves me a little bit grossed out, the more realistic it is, the more I expect it to have a mind of its own. And Fats not only looks more real, he seems more real. He has a personality and a quirkiness all of his own, and that just makes things worse.
Hey, you know what I think?
Now, what do you think?
We're gonna be a star.
I mean, you get to the point where you almost like him. Anthony Hopkins does a really good job portraying both Corky the ventriloquist and Fats, but we're definitely getting into the too human for comfort territory now. And fair warning if you want to watch it, we're also getting a little bit more gruesome with this one. Corky is a wannabe close-up magician who lacks confidence. He's awkward and shy and lacks real stage presence. Kind of like somebody else I know not a million miles away from here. That is, of course, until he introduces Fats.
I guess the reason I'm such a great lover is,
I want to hear about your sex life if you don't mind.
Tell us all about yours then. Everybody likes short stories.
A crass, wisecracking dummy that takes shots at everyone, Corky including, and acts as perfect misdirection for the sleight of hand magic.
Attaboy, Schmucko!
Fats is the perfect misdirection for the whole movie, in fact. As for the majority of the movie, we're left wondering whether he truly does have a mind of his own, or whether Corky's just another one in the list going slowly mad. Is it all in his mind? Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it totally is. I just said it was. No, I was telling the truth. Just shut up and watch the movie. Did I jump? I did once, but it was okay. It was a deserved jump. Chuckle meter up to comedy club and popcorn rating of, yeah, okay, I looked at my phone a couple of times. It might be that the film slowed down in the middle, or it might just be my wandering brain, but strong opening, strong ending, and Fats is one creepy little schmuck.
Thank you.
Now, it's tradition in lists videos to have an honourable mentions list, and this seems like as good a place as any to put it. So, first on the list, this creepy little bastard here. As far as I know, he doesn't have a name and only appears in the film for a few minutes, but it's at a particularly gruesome moment, and honestly, could you ever forget that face? No. No, you couldn't. Happy nightmares. Susie. May is a lonely and awkward veterinary assistant who was given Susie the doll as a child to keep her company, and it has been her only friend until she meets a boy with perfect hands and becomes completely obsessed.
I like every part of him, especially his hands.
It sparks the beginning of Mary's descent into batshit crazy.
I need more parts.
Slappy.
Hello, Papa.
He's a dummy.
Who are you calling dummy?
He's evil. He's in a scary movie for kids. He's voiced by Jack Black. All good enough reasons to slap Slappy on the list. And to be fair, if I'd been a kid when I watched this movie, I'd have been watching Slappy from behind my pillow shield. 'Cause you know, monsters are allergic to soft furnishings, that's why you always hide under your duvet. Robert. As I was looking for scary doll movies, I came across one called Robert Reborn. To be fair, I don't really find doll movies scary, and I'm not really scared of dolls. Except one. Robert the doll. I do not like that one. So much so that I won't even Google a picture of him to include in this video, because the story around Robert is that he can curse you by just looking at a photo of him. I mean, I don't believe it, obviously, but Lula does. And we share a brain, so for Lula's sake, no Robert. Billy. You can't have a scary doll list without Billy. Creepy enough on his own with his clown white face, hollow eyes and deep raspy voice, Billy also has a tragic backstory. Once destined to be a toy for soon-to-be Jigsaw Killer John Kramer's unborn son, Billy was later warped into the figurehead for revenge after a tragic incident led to Kramer's wife losing the baby. Billy is the better-known face of the Saw franchise, but as he's only really the representation of the real evil, I'm putting him on the honourable mention list. But a high honour it is, 'cause our Billy is iconic. The late 80s and early 90s are notorious for their trashy horror movies. Some iconic, some utter garbage. From the 80s onwards, we're no longer relying on the sheer psychological terror of the almost human puppet or doll. This is the period where scary dolls really came into their own. They were autonomous, sentient, and wicked. But rather than going over every movie of the time, here's a quick compilation list. Puppet Master, Puppet Master 2, Puppet Master 3, Toulon's Revenge, Dollman, Demonic Toys, Dollman vs Demonic Toys, Puppet Master 4, Puppet Master 5, The Final Chapter, Curse of the Puppet Master, and Retro Puppet Master. I feel like I may have to watch the entire Puppet Master franchise at some time, but it already sounds like an exhaustive list, and there were 4 more in the early 2000s. These decades can't always boast the best movies, but they can boast the most number of dolls. And part of that is down to the 1987 film Dolls, which one source says features a whopping 101 dolls. No, I didn't count them, and to be honest I think there's probably more than that once you include set dressing, but of the ones that are brought to life, it is probably the largest cast of demonic dolls ever put on screen.
You know, Ralph, deep down inside, you know.
Dolls is the tale of a hapless group of people who get stranded in a storm and have to take shelter in the home of an old toy maker and his wife, who may or may not have creepy intentions. It's very hard to tell. Our cast includes a 7-year-old girl called Judy, her hideous dad and stepmother, 2 obnoxious British teens, and the bumbling yet lovable Ralph, who's really just a child at heart, which might just be a good thing to have in order to survive this house of horrors, as the dolls come to life at night and punish the more despicable of the group. All in all, it's a group of very unlikable characters, and the only real question is, who do you want to see go first? The British girls. It's the British girls, without a doubt. I mean, the parents are horrible too, but I can wait for them to get their comeuppance. It has to be drawn out for them. They really deserve it. But the sooner we get rid of this, the better. Judy is adorable and Ralph is precious, making them the only 2 worth rooting for. Unless you count the toys. I honestly felt more sorry for some of the toys' demise than I did for the humans. Maybe that says more about me than the film. The dolls in this one are brought to life through a mixture of stop motion and puppetry, as well as maybe the odd case of, there's a doll on my face, get it off! The dolls give great face, whether it's rolling their little eyes, or their little rubber faces suddenly breaking into an eerie smile. The director, Stuart Gordon, is better known for his film Reanimator, and many of his fans thought this was a rather tame outing by comparison. But I preferred it. Reanimator fans might come after me for that one, but I don't care, you're all old now, come at me with your Zimmer frames. I'm gonna have to stop because the boy's now in the bathroom doing a talkie talk and he's even louder than before. This film is silly and it knows it's silly. Oh, I'm just realising my doll has fallen over. I forgot you knocked him over. I'll go and bring this one with me. And a cat in the background. It's quirky, campy fun with tongue firmly wedged in cheek and added blood and gore to boot. What's not to like? There was nothing really that made me jump in this one, but I will give it a creep factor of 8 bloodshot eye turns and a popcorn rating of more please, because I really enjoyed this one. I'll also give it a giggle score of cheeks are slightly sore. I had a good few giggles throughout this one, but mainly there were moments that just made me smile for reasons that I can't quite explain.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Hey, wanna play?
You thought I'd forgotten about him, didn't you? We can't visit the 80s and not stop in to say hi to our old pal Chucky, the icon that made the scary doll what it is. With 7 films under his belt spanning right into the 2000s, Chucky is the most famous, most successful and most prolific doll ever. That's all I was going to say. He even got a reboot in 2019 and a TV series. Yes, Puppet Master has more films at 11 in total, but unless you're actually a Puppet Master connoisseur, I dare you to name at least one puppet from that franchise. Go on, I'll wait. This was the movie that taught me to have a healthy respect for dolls and toys alike. Except for this one. He likes the pins. It's fine. It rubs the lotion on its skin. The scene that always stuck with me wasn't anything gruesome. It was the moment when the aunt carries Chucky by the arm down the hall, bashing his head on door frames and walls. And Chucky didn't like that, and he lets her know in his very own good guy way. If you don't know, and why don't you know, Chucky is a happy, friendly doll sold as merchandise for the TV show Good Guys, and comes with all kinds of accessories, including matching shoes for doll and child. Convenient for Killer Chucky. Less so for Andy.
You got on your feet?
Good guy PJ sneakers.
One particular doll becomes possessed by the soul of serial killer and all-round nasty guy Charles Lee Ray, who knows spooky magic for some reason, and abracadabras himself inside the doll's body before dying. This doll is then bought for poor Andy, who loves him dearly until all hell breaks loose. I haven't seen all of the Chucky movies, so for this one I decided to just rewatch the original and the remake. Now, I'm a little jaded these days because I might have watched one too many horror movies, so I was fully expected to be disappointed with the original. I thought there was no way that a killer doll could live up to my nostalgic expectations. But I watched this when I was quite young and innocent, so I'm still going to rate it pretty high on the scareometer for the sake of little Fitty, who was probably watching this rocking back and forth in a corner in a puddle of her own urine. Stinky. But I was, if I'm honest, fully expecting this to be very dated, very 80s, and not very scary or good. But maybe it would be bad good? But no, it did not disappoint. I absolutely loved it, and I loved it as much today as I was scared of it then. It might still just be the nostalgia talking, but Chucky is a great film. It's neither too drawn out or too rushed. I mean, I hate it with the supernatural films where they spend 3/4 of the movies going, "Oh, scary thing was over there and now it's over here. Ooh!" But nothing actually happens, and then all the action is in the last 10 minutes of the movie. Boring. But I thought Chucky had the perfect pacing for what it was, and it's still enjoyable 35 years later. Wow, I feel old. I was 8 years old when this came out. Alex Vincent, who plays little Andy, is so unbelievably cute. He delivers his lines pretty well for a tiny little thing, and the scene when he knows that Chucky is coming to kill him and he breaks down crying nearly broke my heart. I always worry when they have young actors like that and they get them to cry convincingly on camera. I wonder what on earth they could have done to them to get that reaction. Apparently for this one they told the kid to imagine something bad happening. So not too bad really, was it? They told him to imagine that his parents had died. I mean, it's probably not the worst thing they could have done, but it's still pretty unpleasant. For this film, Chucky was brought to life through a mixture of puppets and animatronics, and of course the voice of Brad Dourif. A second actor was used for Chucky's nice voice, Eden Groves.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end.
Who also did the voice for a real-world talking doll called Corky. Funny how the names keep coming back in this one. Surprisingly, not an awful lot of people realise that actor Ed Gale played a huge part in bringing the character of Chucky to life. He's credited as Chucky's stunt double, but he has a bigger part to play than that. Anytime Chucky is seen in full and moving in a more realistic fashion, Ed Gale was in the suit, giving more believability to the character. The only issue was that Gale, at nearly 3.5 feet tall, was about 10 inches taller than the actual Chucky doll. This meant that they had to make replicas of the sets where Gale would appear, increasing the scale by 30% to match the actor. Ed Gale has played many costumed characters, including Station from Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, but these days sticks to playing mostly human characters. I guess I should watch the remake as well now. Nope! What the heck is that? That's horrible! That's scarier than the charred molten blob from the end of the first movie. And this is the nice face! But it's fine, it's fine. A redesign is inevitable. Let's move on. It's all good.
This is for Tupac.
It's not good. It's not awful, but it's not good. So, changes to the film itself. The dolls are no longer called good guys, they are Buddy with an I, because cool and trendy and interactive. I'm going to assume, though I've not found anything in writing, that this is also a shout out to the original script where Chucky was actually called Buddy, but they couldn't actually use the name Buddy because there were already a line of Buddy dolls. I've said Buddy far too many times now. They couldn't use the name because there was already a real life doll on the market called My Buddy Dolls, which were of course part of the inspiration for Chucky anyway. I get why they'd make that change. That's the kind of toy we'd make nowadays, the kind of toy we'd want. Like an Alexa for your toddler. Except Andy's not a toddler in this one, he's a preteen. Easier to work with, I guess, but not nearly quite as adorable. We've moved away from magic and voodoo, probably for the best, and now it's just tech gone wrong. Everything electronic in this world seems to be run by one company, Kazlan, who also make the Buddy dolls. Little interactive walking, talking remote controls, and your newest best buddy. But at the factory, a disgruntled employee switches off all the safety features on one of the Buddy dolls, and that is the Buddy doll that ends up in Andy's possession. Okay, let's talk about Buddy.
Did you say Chucky?
It's Buddy in this movie, and all he really wants to do is love and protect Andy and be best friends forever. Interestingly enough, this is also more in line with the original draft for the first Child's Play movie. It was going to be played with a lot more ambiguity, with you never really being quite sure whether it was Andy or the doll that was causing all the murders, as every victim was someone who had wronged or upset Andy in some way. And that's essentially what this movie does, but sadly they didn't keep the ambiguity. Buddy is a lot more comical in this than Chucky ever was. He's a newborn essentially and doesn't really seem to know any better. The typical misunderstood monster. I kind of feel sorry for the Chuckster at one point. Then he hurts a cat and I stop.
good feelings gone.
The puppet they use is pretty decent, but there are moments when Chucky is clearly CG, and I find that rather distracting. Kitty cat. And he has the added power of being able to control everything connected to Kazlan tech with his little ET finger. Now, I like Mark Hamill. I really do. And if I was judging the Chuckies in isolation, I would say I really enjoyed his buddy performance. It was fun. There was more humour and silly to it. But since I'm comparing, I'm going to have to say that I still prefer Grandma Wormtongue. Maybe that's just nostalgia talking again. There are a lot more characters in this one than the original, and I think the movie loses something by doing that. When it was just Andy, his mum, and potentially the detective, it felt a little bit more isolated, more claustrophobic and desperate. There's no one else on their side. And you can really feel that in the scene where the detective drives away from the mum and she's left standing there feeling pretty helpless. They could have had that with this one, and I think they might have been trying to go for that, but it moves a little bit too fast. First his friends don't like him anymore, then they decide to give him a second chance for no reason other than the script told them to. His mum sees him acting out, being violent, smashing things. She gets so worried that she takes him to work with her. Because that's where the climax of the film is going to happen and he needs to be there. And speaking of the climax, it feels like we're going into full-blown campy horror mode. Which I don't mind, it's the perfect kind of style for this type of movie. But it didn't have that same feel earlier on. Silly, but not quite campy enough. I don't know, there were bits I liked and bits that just didn't seem to work. For a start, the stakes felt a lot higher in the original. No one but a 6-year-old knew the secret, and that 6-year-old was getting blamed for everything and facing being locked up in an institution for the rest of his life, or having his soul sucked out and replaced by a serial killer, and only his mum could help him. By comparison, we don't really get that same kind of tension in this one. But we got more deaths, so that's fun, I guess. I should give minus points to the remake for pointless jump scares, but I would probably add them back on for the cringe bonus. There were a few injuries in this one that really made me squirm. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Original Chucky, for standing the test of time and still being great, gets a Golden Popcorn Award. But for the remake, Participation Award. Annabelle. When Annabelle made her first appearance in The Conjuring, she looked decently spooky. And a lot of people thought, oh, she looks cool. She deserves her own spooky movie. So she got her own spooky movie. Trouble was, it wasn't spooky. Whether you like the films or not is of course down to taste. And for the record, my opinions are Annabelle bad, Annabelle Creation pretty good, Annabelle Comes Home decent. But the real problem I have with the Annabelle movies is that they don't do very much Annabelling. And no, it's supposed to be Annabelle that's causing all the spooky goings on, but that's a cop-out in my opinion. We paid for a spooky doll movie, we want to see a spooky doll movie. Even when Annabelle is in shot, she's not doing anything. According to producer Peter Safran, they were dead set on having the doll never move. Apparently they thought it would be much scarier wondering what she was going to do or where she was going to be, rather than watch a doll clitter-clat across the room with a knife in her hand. Tell that to Chucky.
Chucky's gonna be a bro.
Okay, that does look a little bit silly. Fair enough, it must be difficult to make a doll move in a way that looks convincing and not really ridiculous. But as we've seen from the doll list, the doll doesn't actually have to move or do anything in order to be scary. The mere threat of the doll, the atmosphere around the doll, and the way that people react to it plays a greater part in how frightening it is. And apart from looking a little bit creepy, Annabelle doesn't really give off that air of danger. And all those supernatural activities that happen in the movies only seem vaguely linked to her. We see ghosts, a demon, a scarecrow, a nun, and in Annabelle Comes Home, a whole host of spookies. But they're only really linked with Annabelle because movie says so. So, were the movies frightening? Well, there were moments in Creation and Home that were not too bad. But was Annabelle frightening? No. And speaking of Annabelle, the real Annabelle, as you probably know, was a Raggedy Ann doll. And it wasn't an old doll with a demonic history, it was purchased new in 1970. So why did they change the design of the doll? It could be argued that the original with its clown-like features and button eyes is scary enough. Well, trademarking was the first reason. I can't find anything that says whether or not they approached the makers of Raggedy Ann, or if they just assumed they wouldn't want their doll associated with scary movies. Secondly, they wanted to make a doll that would look more scary to cinema audiences. And wouldn't you know, we're back at that uncanny valley again, because the form they chose was a more human and realistic face. James Wan was apparently very particular about that. He wanted it to look human and be about the size of a small child. And the design worked, to begin with at least. From the moment audiences saw her, they wanted more. Sadly, more is exactly what they didn't get, as the movie makers didn't seem to know what to do with her. And she spent most of the time sitting in a rocking chair while other monsters were doing the spooking. I mean, the old lady down the street's scarier than that. Who am I kidding? I am the old lady down the street. So for this I only watched Annabelle Comes Home, and it wasn't bad. A medium bag of popcorn. It did have jump scares, but they were acceptable within the storyline. And there were a couple of nice sequences. I liked the bride walking past the windows and then into the mirrors as we follow her around the room. And I quite like the look of the arms coming out of the game box. But as far as being creepy goes, an average of 5. Annabelle, do better.
It's nice to meet you, Katie. Do you want to hang out?
Now we're on to Megan, Megan, Megan. Now we're on to Megan, Meg. And so at last we get to Megan. And we come full circle back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the movie with the uncanny valley, which was specifically referring to robots specifically like Megan. Megan is the uncanny valley, almost too real, but still failing to accurately mimic life. The dead eyes, the expressionless face, the jerky movements, and the robotic voice that breaks into a GLaDOS impression at times.
Recalibrating response model.
I'm not going to say Megan is a masterpiece, but Megan was pretty good. Megan is creepy enough and charismatic enough to be put up alongside the pantheon of horror icons. She's eerie more than she is outright scary. Like Fats, she has her own personality and even gets a little sassy at times.
Oh, really?
All this adds to her feeling more real, and with that realness comes the creeping sensation of dread. If she was just a robot, she would only do what she was programmed to do. But since she seems to have a mind of her own, feelings and rage, coupled with all that strength, there's no telling what she could be capable of. Using reason and logic to justify horrendous actions and having the physical and mental capacity to carry it out, and even get away with it. But I don't tend to think that deeply about these things, I just want to see the stabby stabs. For the story of Megan, it is nice that it's not all just, ooh, scary doll. There's also the themes of grief and learning to become a parent, which is summed up when Gemma, the creator, says, I didn't give you the right protocols, and Megan responds with, you didn't give me anything. You just expected me to figure it out. Not a secret message, it's pretty overt, but it's nice that it's in there. Megan even had a few feely cries in it, which I wasn't really expecting. I would say 4 feely moments depending on your temperament and 2 feely cries. Of the moist eye variety. The writing is pretty good in those scenes, and the actresses playing the main leads deliver a very convincing, make you sad performance. The young girl playing Katie, who I thought was called Katie for the entirety of the movie, is especially good as she has to go through a whole range of emotions and she delivers them pretty well. Pickup shot here. I forgot to talk about the actual doll, which is the actual point of these actual videos. I can't even talk right. I'm sure most people know already that Megan was played by a young dancer called Amy Donald. Let's add this little insert. 11-year-old dancer. Hard to avoid since she went viral with that dance and that hands-free cartwheel. But did you know the other stunt she performed herself? The creepy run on all fours was all Amy. Hard feat if you've ever tried it yourself. And that eerie cobra rise? Well, despite not needing to, the young girl went home and practiced it until she could do that stunt practically unaided. There were wires involved in the actual stunt, but most of that was all Amy. Megan's voice is provided by actress Jenna Davis, and together with Amy and a very clever puppet, they brought Megan to life on our screens. I had assumed that the majority of times that we saw Megan, it was just Amy in costume. But I was wrong. For most of the talking scenes, puppeteer Paul Lewis is sitting just out of shot. One of the main features they wanted for the Megan doll was there to be very minimal movement, so that meant that the puppeteer had to hold her incredibly still. This guy's arm muscles must have been aching by the end of the day. Her face is an animatronic puppet with the eye and mouth movements pre-programmed in. For Amy's shots, she wore a plain silicone mask with the eye holes cut out, and then the puppet's face was then superimposed on top of her. Seamless. Don't know about you, but I definitely found it hard to tell when it was a puppet and when it was an Amy. I looked away again too early, didn't I? I always look away too early. Help me, Matt. I won't give a kill count because spoilery spoils, but I will give it a thumbs up for not beating us about the head with some jump scares. It was delightfully creepy, and a couple of good chuckles in there too. I'm gonna say 4 chuckles because I think there were at least 4 times when I ha-had. And overall I give this a big ol' bag of popcorn that I didn't quite get to the bottom of. Not amazing, but I still really enjoyed this film. And I think Megan herself is going to go down as a new horror icon. Now I'm done with this, I'm going to finally go off and watch Amanda the Jedi because I've been holding off watching it so I don't get spoily poos. Chronic flatulence.
It's insane, right?